Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to session 2 of the Nobel Prize Dialogue Sydney. My name is Attilla Brungs, and I'm the Vice-Chancellor here at UNSW Sydney. The Nobel Prize Dialogue brings together Nobel Prize laureates, world-leading scientists, creative thinkers, thought leaders to discuss some of the most complex issues facing our society today. The theme of the Nobel Prize Dialogue Sydney is Future of Decision-Making. Tackling these global issues requires collaboration on a global scale, and it means understanding and improving the way we make decisions, both collectively and individually. I'm actually quite pleased to be chairing this session today as it explores democracy in a digital age. And we'll have the opportunity to hear from two very preeminent thought leaders who will share their insights on the impact of digital evolution. Before I introduce them, there's a couple of thoughts I wouldn't mind progressing. Democracy, something close and dear to all of our hearts, is about giving people a voice. It's an important foundational system, but the current model by which we implement democracy may no longer be fit for purpose. Our democratic systems for making decisions, for getting people involved in those decisions, may not have been designed to deal with some of the complex challenges the world faces today, or the way that people interact. Technological advancements means that we have greater access to information than ever before. The key, often, in the past, but is today, is how do you determine which information is valuable? Already with online platforms, social media, we've seen a spread of information, misinformation, and disinformation. The release of algorithms, data analytics, some technologies, including AI, have seen even greater impact, with more and more people responding to misinformation and potential for public manipulation of opinions. AI can assist with filtering information, but critical thinking, sense-making is still absolutely crucial. We need to ask the right questions, because if we ask the wrong questions, much of our technology today can exaggerate a wrong answer. Something I learned very long ago as a simple scientist was a signal-to-noise ratio. Where did you see a signal against a whole background of white noise? Some of the technologies today that politicians look to, companies look to in our democracy, see that white noise amplified with the use of these technologies, once again making it hard for them to determine which signals should they see about the people. But digital enablement also gives us new tools, new opportunities for people to engage in democracy far more effectively. An informed populace is crucial for democracy to work. So with that thought, I'd now like to introduce our first speaker. Today, it is Lee Hickin. Lee is the National Chief Technology Officer, ANZ Microsoft Australia. Driven by the potential for positive and responsible innovation in areas such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, mixed reality technologies, Lee has worked across Asia, UK, and Australia. As a national CTO, Lee advises governments, commercial organisations on digital strategy and the economic innovation and social impact of cloud-scale technology. Lee believes in the potential of AI to help create a brighter, more inclusive future, and is a regular speaker on cloud technology and so forth. He sits on the New South Wales Government Artificial Intelligence Review Committee, as well as many boards supporting technological innovators and public policy groups. Lee also heads Microsoft's Office of Responsible AI for ANZ and guides organisations through the mechanism and culture needed to embrace responsible AI implementation. In his presentation, Lee will explore the unique position Microsoft with the advent of AI and the balance between being regulated, its investment, and the adoption of AI. His presentation title, Please Regulate Me, Balancing Shareholder Value with Regulation and Trust, is about, with the rapid growth of AI, both our lives as a potential vehicle for economic growth, Microsoft has found itself in a unique position of asking to be regulated, whilst at the same time accelerating its investment and adoption of AI in its products and services. How do they maintain the balance? What is the decision process, and what might this all look like in the near future? On that note, over to you, Lee.
Thank you, Attilla, for that wildly accurate but obviously infinitely too long introduction to me, but I appreciate the kind words. So let me start by sort of stating up front that I represent Microsoft, and I'm here presenting this point of view on this world from Microsoft because it's my lived experience, but I'm by no means suggesting that it is the best or the only company that is straddling this challenge we sit of today in our technology industry of how do we balance democracy and opportunity in a digital world. So with that, I sort of frame my narrative around the power of three, because I think we like to think in three. So I'm going to frame it around three lessons that I think we've learned over the last 20 to 25 years as an organization in exploring our role in this. But let me go back a little bit further than that. And I remember as a teenager, a long way back in the 80s, when I just learned to drive. And I remember being told by many people, like it may have been my parents possibly, but I don't remember who. But I remember being told this idea that you're really only going to have respect for the car once you've had an accident, as if that the only way that I could cherish the value of what I have in the ability to drive and owning a vehicle was to come right to the edges of losing it, or to recognize the loss of it, almost, but not quite. And this has stuck with me for some time, and I think a lot about this when I think about the technology that we empower the world with, and I think about the lives that my teenage children experience, and think about how much do they need to lose of themselves before they recognize what is being taken by technology and the tools that they use every day. And by reflecting on that, I kind of think about Microsoft as an organization. Now, I joined Microsoft in 2005, but just prior to me joining Microsoft, of course, you would all know that as an organization, they had spent at that point, 25, 30 years nearly as one of the innovators, the starters of the technology revolution in the 70s, and the creation of part of that industry that we've all grown to live and adopt into our lives. And we became the company that lost sight of the value of competition, lost sight of the value of having a market space where competition and democracy and the opportunity for all was actually valuable. And, as an organization having such a strong market position, in 1998, that came to a head in the antitrust case. By 2001, that case was decided, and at one point Microsoft was to be split up. But then, of course, petition went in, and Microsoft stayed intact and as an organization. But it lost its heart, and I think there was a period of time where, as an organization, it struggled to figure out what that meant to now being that close to the edge of losing everything. But where do you now sit? How do you now react? How do you behave with that? And of course, as years passed, Steve Jobs, in fact, in the year that he passed, unfortunately, but what he said was Microsoft had become irrelevant. And the market often said that and echoed that comment that Microsoft became irrelevant. But then in 2014, Satya Nadella became the CEO and sort of reset the tone of Microsoft. And he reset that tone with a very two decisive actions. One of which was he enforced the reading of a book across the entire SLT, which was a book that some of you may be familiar with called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, which was about changing the language of business, changing the language of how we all operate as a set of internal organization. And the other thing he did, which was around democracy, was to represent Microsoft in a different way. So if you've ever seen a Microsoft product launch, you've seen Steve Ballmer dancing, then you've also probably not seen Satya Nadella going to a small school in Kenya on the launch of Windows 10 and sitting there with a bunch of teachers and students in a part of the world that is unserved by our industry, to bring that technology to them and ask that question: how does this technology help you? What if this technology was in your hands? What could you do differently? So the first lesson is democracy in the digital age takes leadership. And it takes leadership from the very top, and it takes leadership that does and doesn't just say. Just after that, we appointed Brad Smith as the Chief Legal Officer, which was, again, a new thing for Microsoft. And this was the first step in really rebuilding Microsoft as a company that was just focused on its contributions to law and policy as governance, as much as it was focused on its technology, innovation, and research. At the same time as that appointment, Satya was quoting the book, the John Markoff book, Machines of Loving Grace, with the statement, the best way to answer the hard questions about control in a world full of smart machines is by understanding the values of those who actually build those systems. And he was signaling the idea that as an organization, we need to represent the values of the systems we want to build, not just represent the value of the technology. And so in 2016, we developed a first set of ethics principles around transparency, accountability, safety, reliability, security, and inclusion. But we quickly realized that ethics struggle against the idea of individual desires. I reflect on the Baroness's presentation earlier around this dopamine versus cognitive decision-making that we all deal with. And so it was a challenge for us as an organization to then think about how do we collectively have a set of ethics that we can execute. In 2018, we wrote an article called The Future Computed, which seems archaically old these days. Now we think about the world of generative AI where we sit today, but we pose questions like, could we see a Hippocratic oath for technology? Could we see AI law in the same way that we see law for healthcare or for driverless cars or other things emerging today? We didn't really understand what it was looking like, but we started to build some thinking around this. And then, of course, in 2019, Brad Smith wrote the book Tools and Weapons, with the very clear statement that when you build technology that changes the world, you have some responsibility to help address that world. And so what we were developing is lesson 2. that democracy in the digital age requires action and measurable outcomes, and perfection is, as it always has been, the enemy of progress. And so we needed to all be taking steps, small steps perhaps, in order to lead the way and be ready to hand that torch over to those that really enact democracy for us as a society. And so we found ourselves contemplating our purpose as a company. Why do we exist? What is our true value as an organization? And that true value was really about understanding the people that make up a company versus the reason for being a company. And this was an interesting pivotal moment for a company. We made that realization that as a company, we existed because of the people, not because of what we built and the products we delivered. And so we found ourselves contemplating this business. How do we balance revenues and shareholder return with this responsibility we felt to take action? Because in order for our technology to have impact, we needed to apply action with that. And as Professor Schmidt said in his opening statements around the speed and influence of technology in our lives and this sort of massive exponential growth in the last 20 years, and what I would describe as almost uncontrollable growth in the last 5 years, to a point now where we have 66, 68% of the world's population is connected to technology in some way. And so we started in 2017 talking about this idea of democratization of AI. And in fact, my next speaker, a friend of mine, Professor Genevieve Bell, is going to talk about her side of this, but we in fact were working with Genevieve back in 2018, 2019 on framing this idea of what does social license look like in Australia for the adoption of AI technologies. But what we quickly started to realize was two things: that all the money we invest in innovation, building amazing technology, will be lost if we're not investing in responsibility at the same pace. In so much as we can build great technology, if people don't trust that technology, if people aren't comfortable with that technology, then they'll never consume it. And that's the balance we hold as a company. We need to sell products, but we also need to sell to make the space for those products to be viable and to have value. And we find that customers are no longer buying technology. Customers are buying a partnership, and a partnership that is grounded in solving both the problem and reducing the risk of harm. So similar to the ESG commitments we see today, responsibility for AI does run that risk of greenwashing or AI washing. And it comes back to that lesson too about action speaking louder than words, and we have to take action. But AI is no longer, responsibility and building democracy in our business and democracy in our technology is no longer a nice to have, it's a condition of doing business. And so our third and final lesson was that whilst trust and responsibility are economic levers, and they must be operated in a democratic way, and that means they require participation, because that is the foundation of democracy, and they require auditable governance, because that is the foundation of trust in democracy, is to know how democracy operates. So if I look to the future, I would echo something that Baroness Grufield said in her comments earlier, which is on this risk of AI taking over the world. And I don't see that as the real risk. I think the real risk, as the Baroness stated, is that the people that have access to and the influence they may drive through AI is the real risk we face. That's the greater threat. And that comes down to what can we do, which is provide mechanisms to control access to the technology. And then the other piece that we all as society can work on is the tolerance we will have for AI in our lives and where we want it to reach into. And with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Genevieve.
Thanks kindly, Lee. Just before we get to Genevieve, I think it's important so everybody knows what a distinguished speaker and how lucky we are to have Genevieve speak. So Distinguished Professor Genevieve Bell, AO, is the Director of the School of Cybernetics, Director of the 3AI and the Florence Violet Mackenzie Chair at the ANU. She's also the Vice President and Senior Fellow at the Intel Corporation. Genevieve completed a PhD in Cultural Anthropology at Stanford University in 1998. She's best known for her work at the intersection of cultural practice and technology development. She's widely recognized as an influential voice within academia, industry, and government. Genevieve joined the ANU in 2017, having spent 18 years in Silicon Valley helping guide Intel's product development and also its social science development. In 2017, Genevieve was appointed the inaugural director of the 3AI, co-founded by the ANU and CSIRO's Data 61. The Institute's mission is to establish a new branch of engineering to responsibly and sustainably scale AI-enabled cyber-physical systems. Genevieve is the inaugural appointee to the Florence Violet Mackenzie Chair at ANU, named in honour of Australia's first female electrical engineer. Again, promoting the use of inclusive use of technology in society, something we've heard from Lee already. She's also presented the highly acclaimed ABC Boyer Lectures of 2017, which investigated what it means to be human and Australian in the digital world. Genevieve has been appointed as a non-executive director to the Commonwealth Bank of Australia Board, member of the Prime Minister's National Science and Technology Council, a fellow of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, and in her presentation, Professor Bell will explore the importance of systems thinking in technology, democracy, and decision-making. The presentation title is Cybernetics and the Future Decision-Making, exploring how systems approach, more specifically cybernetics, could be a crucial tool for thinking about the future approaches to democracy and technology. How looking to systems as the most useful unit of analysis could offer powerful insights into how we can explore and unfold the opportunities and challenges of future decision-making. Over to you, Genevieve.
Thank you, Attila. That's a terrifying biography. It explains why I feel a little tired today. It's my pleasure to be here, and I want to change gears for us just a little bit, and I want to tell you 3 stories that I think relate to this moment we find ourselves in as we are problematizing what it means to think about democracy and the roles of technology therein. And I want to go back to the 1940s, and I want to reflect on a moment in time in late 1948 when the world seemed like it was moving incredibly quickly, when every newspaper was full of details of the latest thing computers could do, and every month they seemed to be able to do more than they could do the minute before, where the cataclysmic impact of World War II was physically written on half of the countries in Europe, physically written on the bodies and families of millions of people the world over, where the role of technology in that war and in the peace felt not out of control, but certainly escalatory. And in that moment in time, there were lots of people writing lots of thought pieces about the future of computing, about the future of the role of computing in society, about what it would mean to have computational objects that could store all of our thinking, about what it would mean to outsource our memories to computational objects, about what it would mean about truth and democracy and citizenship and personhood, and about whether we had any agency to make choices about what came next. And in that moment of all of that febrile activity, a collection of really unexpected people gathered in New York City in a hotel to argue about what the future is going to be. And that group of people brought together Norbert Wiener and John von Neumann, so men who'd been involved in building the ENIAC and early computing. It brought Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead, 2 world kind of renowned anthropologists who were really interested in thinking about the relationship between culture and change. It brought Licklider, the man who would give us the internet. It had Claude Shannon, the sort of head of information architecture and basically the first CTO a company had at Bell Labs, and a whole collection of other people. And they argued about the future, and they argued about what terms we should have for the future. And they wondered collectively and iteratively through a whole series of conversations about what was the vocabulary we needed, what was the mental model we needed to have, and how would we think about managing all that computing so that it didn't end up in driving yet another escalation of war, violence, and destruction. And the thing they came to was an idea that they called cybernetics. That's an old word. You'll recognize it. It's been living rent-free in your head because of science fiction for the last 50 years. If you were my age and maybe Lee's age, and I'm not sure about Attila's, but I'm going to suggest it might be his age too, you will recognize cybernetics from Douglas Adams' Serious Cybernetics Company, possibly from the Terminator and a few other places. But back in the 1940s, it was a way to describe the system, and it was a way to describe complex dynamic systems that had computing at their core. And it was a theory of systems that privileged both the components and the relationships between them. And it argued really powerfully for the fact that you had to have humans, technology, and the environment in a constant loop, and that you needed to think about all of those pieces. Now, cybernetics was one way to think about the world. Turned out it was a really powerful one. It endured in really unexpected ways. As Lee and I both know, the men who gathered in Dartmouth in 1956 to coin the phrase artificial intelligence and to assert the proposition that you could so precisely describe learning in the human intellect that a machine could be made to simulate it, all of those guys were part of the cybernetics conversations. They created the phrase artificial intelligence because they didn't want Norbert Wiener to come to the event because he was kind of unpleasant. So they figured if they gave it a different name, he wouldn't attend. So we end up with artificial intelligence as a formulation of technology, in part to exclude someone and in part to streamline a conversation about what technology could do. Because what we get to when we get to artificial intelligence is a removal of the notion of where humans might sit, where the environment might sit, and about the relationships between and through all of those things. So that's story number 1. Story number two is if you sit here in 2023 and you think to yourself, are we in a moment where it feels like the role of technology is being relitigated, where we worry about the relationships between ourselves, computational machines, and the roles they might have in our lives? And as everyone who has come before me on this day keeps asserting, it's all about a system, whether that system is democracy, the economy, the environment, computation itself. It's really pretty clear that this idea of the system is this really important way of thinking about things and a really important tool we need to get a handle on and a vocabulary for. So when I came home to Australia back in 2017, I came home with the demented ambition that what I wanted to do was establish a new branch of engineering, specifically to manage that AI system and to think about how we could take it safely, responsibly, and sustainably to scale. And I've come to realize over the last 7 years that what I'm really doing is building capability and capacity. And it's capability and capacity around how we think about systems. How do we find a vocabulary? How do we find the necessary tools to equip ourselves, our students, our colleagues, our citizens to be able to see the world not just as individuals, but as systems? And what does it mean to be able to think about what are the components of that system? How do those components relate to and with each other so that it's never just a laundry list, but it's actually about the dynamics and the relationships? And in building that capability, what we're also building is a set of key conversations and I hope key decision makers who help unfold a different set of futures, one that's more sensitive to the fact that all of these things are indeed systems and that changing these systems isn't just about regulating one piece of the equation, but actually taking a whole point of view. And I guess that leaves me in this rapid rush through history from cybernetics in 1946, 47, 48, artificial intelligence in 1956, School of Cybernetics here in Australia in 2021, about what the through line is. And the through line's about how is it that we as individuals, as citizens of democratic nations, in this particular instance for me, Australia, how is it that we show up in these conversations? And how is it that we show up equipped to think about what the 21st century demands of us? It demands how we think about technology, but it's never just about the technology. It's who is using the technology, who's implicated by the technology, who isn't involved in the conversations about the technology, what is the world that technology imagines that it is building and who is in and who is out. It's about what is the environmental footprint of those technologies, how do we think about and develop a point of view about those things. It's about where they're built, the supply chains that they're implicated in, and where we sit in all of those incredibly complicated pieces of the puzzle. And so for me, at least, when I sit on my lucky days in my office here at the Australian National University, and I think about what is the role of universities in a democratic society and in a democratic conversation, I tend to think it's about two things. Respectfully, because I know my boss was on here earlier this morning and today, and I know he was feeling a little bit anxious about the world. I actually think one of our roles is to tell stories about the future that are hopeful stories, stories that let us find our agency, stories that are about a future that is more fair, more sustainable, and more just. But I'm also a realist, and I know it's not just enough to tell those stories. We also have to actively work in the present to disrupt the world we find ourselves in order to make those futures possible. And for me, that disruption is about how we build capability and how we teach ourselves to see the systems so that we can build better, regulate better, transform better, resist better when necessary, decommission when required, and ultimately have a capacity to think about democracy as one of those systems too, not just something that is at the vicissitudes of technologies, but a system in which we actually want to be profoundly and constantly invested. So with that, I'm going to stop and say thank you.
Thank you, kindly, Genevieve, for all of your words. Thank you very much, Lee, for your incredible both insights. We've got opportunities in the next sessions to discuss this. And Genevieve, I'm right with you in terms of universities. If we can't think of what a hopeful world is and act towards it, who can? But I'd like to thank everybody else, the Global Access Partner Group, Nobel Prize Outreach, our supporting organisation Luminos, of course the ANU and UNSW. Now, participants, if you could go to the next session, to do so you need to click exit on the big green button on the top left corner of your screen. And once on the program page, please hit the Join Session 2 discussion, and there we'll have Professor Natalie Stoyanov as the compere for our next discussion. I look forward to seeing you in the next room. Thank you.